Good morning. Like the teacher said in school, good morning. Thank you, class. Thank you. All right. We have a really interesting panel discussion here on discovery, personalization, and the TV user experience. My name is Gerard Kunkel. I'm the founder and managing partner of Next Media Partners. The organization is here to consult with this organization, this group of people, media, technology, organizations, etc. This group is here about personalization and discovery. And what I'd like to do is ask each of these participants to walk through the process of introducing themselves and take only a few seconds to say what your company does in the area of personalization and discovery, just for a little context. But make it very brief because I want to get right into the questions. So first up, Susan Kraus.
Good morning. I'm Susan Kraus. I'm from AltaCast. We do set-top box software, soup to nuts, but we really are good, big specialists in user interface design, and we actually facilitate a lot of the recommendation engines, third-party software to assist the user in discovery.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And next up, Campbell Foster.
Hello. Loud mic. I'm Campbell Foster. I run product marketing for Adobe Primetime. Primetime is Adobe's multi-screen TV platform, which combines ad insertion, playback, DRM, a few other capabilities, and we recently launched a recommendations product leveraging technology from Adobe Marketing Cloud.
Campbell, I'll be very impressed if somehow during this conversation you can tell us about your foot.
I'm going to weave it in.
You're going to weave that in. Next up, Kimberly Hicks.
Hi, Kimberly Hicks, Viacom. We have brands such as MTV, Comedy Central, Nickelodeon, and work to personalize those experiences for our users.
Thank you very much, Kimberly. And then last but not least, Andre.
Hi, I'm Andre Swanston from True Optic. We're a venture-backed startup out of Connecticut that measures more over-the-top consumption of professionally produced content than anybody in the world, and we use that data to drive things like audience acquisition as well as audience segmentation for advertising and personalization.
And yes, Andre was the one individual yesterday in the 5-minute roundup that went 1 second over, but it's still very impressive. Okay. Great. So jumping right in, I'm going to ask all of you to think about your questions as we go through. I'll be very happy to stop over and see you. Much like Rick did yesterday, I'm going to move about the room. We'll try and keep this fast, keep your answers short and crisp and to the point. And let me remind everyone here, this is a group of experienced individuals. You've heard about discovery. You've heard about personalization. Let's talk about those things that go beyond the obvious. So, first question to these panelists, and anyone can chime in and answer this one. Like many US households, my household subscribes to lots of services. And probably like everyone in this room, we subscribe to more services than we really need because we like to understand what's going on. But it exacerbates a particular problem, which is how do you discover and how could you possibly get recommendations on something when the systems themselves have no idea what you subscribe to elsewhere? So that a recommendation is really just a single recommendation from a single service that knows about you, and the assets that they have. So how do you think, as experts in this field, we ultimately address what the consumer really wants, which is the ability to tell them about discovering recommendations that make sense for not only the things they want to see, but the things that they are entitled to see?
I think in your case, and that's my case as well, you have all these disparate services. You have Netflix that doesn't talk to your TV everywhere, that doesn't talk to whatever. But in that case, your internet service provider, so Comcast does have access to all that information, but their ability to use that information for personalization is limited by their carriage agreements, et cetera. So I do think that there's an opportunity for better cooperation between the programmers and the MVPDs in that specific instance.
The recommendation engines we work with mostly are trying to address this, and they actually can do it via software by universal search, where you can search across and most of the applications have open APIs, so you can go to open API for Amazon and find what you want. So you can create a user interface that does this. That's not the problem. It's actually a great solution. It's what the consumer wants. It's the business agreements that are in the way. I think that was mentioned a little bit yesterday, because any one of those people providing content doesn't want a result that comes up that says that it's cheaper on somebody else's service or free on somebody else's service, so they aren't willing to come together on the business agreement to make it easy for you yet.
But is there really ubiquity of metadata out there to make that happen? So if I want to view some content that may be coming from another country, and I subscribe to some expat service, how do the other services know that I have that content, availability of that content?
They don't necessarily, but like we have a demo user interface that lets you pick the services that you would integrate into this user interface, and then you would actually be able to search across those different catalogs that you actually have subscriptions to, and then all of the follow-on stuff would be really easy. You don't have to log into those services. It would just let you play immediately to that service because all of that authentication would happen before you get to the search.
Curious for the audience here, how many of you subscribe to 3 or more services online, content services? Most of you. How many of you have searched for a piece of content only to find out that it is available out there somewhere online, but you have to pay someone else something more because it's not part of your service? Just about the same number of people. So that, in my mind, is one of the frustrations out there, because there are certainly pieces of content that sit outside the more traditional content. So Kim, you work for Viacom. You're what I would consider one of the big media companies, and your content and its metadata is probably well distributed out there. So if someone's looking for some particular show that aired on Nickelodeon, there's probably lots of solutions out there. Can you speak to this a bit?
It's difficult for us because we do have rights and distributions where our content is across many locations. We've been working closely with schema.org and Google, so if you do search for something, it'll bring up all of the metadata about that show, but show you where specific episodes are, where you can access that content. Otherwise, it's very confusing. I've experienced it myself to where I've had to start on Amazon, then go to Netflix, then go to the app. So we're really trying to partner with organizations to make that more discoverable.
And Andre, you've got the largest data set in the world, you said there a moment ago.
That's correct.
Does your system or does your data provide any solution in the future for this?
Yeah, so I think the problem right now is really logistical. So a couple of the issues that we have is that no provider really has enough content in their library to fully fulfill everybody's needs in terms of the content that they're looking for. And then there's a financial disincentive, like you mentioned, for even with universal search. Roku has a pretty great universal search, right? But that's still not personalization or recommendation, because then they don't have the insight into what you actually then watch at any sort of scale inside of their apps. And you could say the same thing for a lot of device manufacturers. So how we've looked at it is trying to have a large amount of data around what is being consumed, and we look at time series data, we look at like micro geolocational, we look at tagging and metadata to try to be a little bit more predictive of what you might want to watch. And we do that more so to drive our audience acquisition and building segments. I think the problem is that there's always going to be, or at least for the foreseeable future, walled gardens and barriers. Netflix does not want Amazon to have insight into how content's being consumed so that you can get better recommendations on Amazon. There's no reason they would want to do that. And then it was mentioned some of the privacy barriers that even like a Comcast or the cable provider would have. So I think the only way that it's realistic is to have access to a large amount of data and be somewhat predictive based off of other indicators.
So I'm going to suggest something controversial, and it's wrapped up in a question here. It's what I like to call the Miracle on 34th Street scenario. And Susan, to your point about the fact that many of these things are wrapped up in licensing agreements and other business rules. If you recall from the Miracle on 34th Street, Santa was asked about a particular product that was available at Macy's, but it was not available at Macy's, so he recommended to go across the street to Gimbel's to get that product. And it was a question as to whether or not that was a good decision, and at least according to the movie, Macy's did quite well having made that decision. Do we see Comcast or potentially other MVPDs or other service providers building a recommendation system that might recommend for the benefit of the consumer, go over there to get what you're looking for?
I think that's a great question, and I think Cablevision probably is the leader in doing this early on. A lot of cable operators that we work with have always thought of Netflix as a competitor, but we are slowly seeing them embrace other catalogs as a compatible catalog to what they have to offer, and instead of trying to push them away, embrace them. So Cablevision about, I don't know, how long ago was it, Patrick, 2 or 3 years ago, let Netflix in, and they came to a good business agreement with Netflix that was good for both parties to allow their users to get both services.
I'm curious, Kim, what about from Viacom's perspective? If someone's looking for a cartoon that's not on Nickelodeon?
Well, from our perspective, if we've licensed it, we want you to watch it. So it doesn't matter where you watch it, we still get the benefit. And the frustration we experience, though, is we would love people to binge watch. And with the rights deals we've set in place that are decades back before even we have like the modern technology and our own apps, we limit that. So it does disrupt that experience. If I want to watch the entire series of something old like Road Rules or something like that, I've got to go all over the place to do it. So it's something I think we need to look to change in the future of how you find that and how you can allow that person to really binge watch and immerse themselves in an experience.
And Campbell and Andre, I'm curious, you're less entwined than Kimberly is in terms of providing that content, wanting to get compensated for providing that content. You're providing systems and solutions to help connect users with content. And in many cases, in all cases, you're selling that to operators to make that possible. Do you feign away from creating solutions that might serve the consumer best because your business partners ask you to put boundaries on these things?
No, so we're investing heavily in data co-ops, so actually facilitating these transactions between partners to the extent that privacy laws allow, to the extent that their business deals allow, but letting the MVPDs and the programmers actually share information about users and what they're interested in and what they're actually watching. And that sort of data co-op model is really starting to take off this year, so we've had a lot of success with that. So what we're interested in doing is enabling the relationships between the broadcaster, between the TV networks and the MVPDs and the consumers, and stepping back and getting out of the way. So that's sort of our model.
Very nice. And Andre?
We've looked at it slightly differently. So the way we look at it is people's owned and operated, and we're talking digital and over-the-top only, not linear, addressable, or traditional broadcast television or cable. But if you look at the consumption of people's content digitally, they have very little access to data, right? And so you look at solutions like Netflix and Amazon, they don't even share with the content owners how their content is performing on those platforms. And then if you look at any of the major media companies that have their own operated platforms, the audience sizes are very small. I mean, we can't share specific numbers, but you're talking about hundreds of thousands to single-digit millions. So the scope of audience is still relatively small. So how we've looked at it in terms of being able to have access to data, there's 7x to 10x more data available across what people are downloading and streaming off network. And we're using that data because it correlates the best with commercialized performance, and it's people don't feel like they're sharing their data with competitors. They're just kind of looking at what's out there in the ecosystem. And there's also a lot of issues with even people getting intelligence off of their own data, right? They're working with one DMP that they were using for desktop and mobile, then they're working with another one for connected TV, then they have a measurement solution, an analytic solution for this platform, and they're using SDK. So I don't think that media companies are even touching the surface yet on leveraging their own data yet. I think that's still something that the industry is maturing in.
And are you writing deals in order to get access to this data? Because obviously at some point, you need to understand which services that subscriber subscribes to, correct?
Yeah, correct. So, I mean, how we're looking at it is we know that we had a lot of behavioral data and insight, all right? But then we still needed to be able to go and measure and get insight out of the owned and operated platforms. And then even if we had all that behavioral data, which we think is really critical in terms of media and entertainment segmentation and personalization, people still want to know things like demo and household size and stuff like that. So we partner with Experian Marketing Services to kind of blend that media consumption on top of all the other household data. And so, we're really excited about what the opportunity for that is in terms of being able to create more predictive models for the demand for content.
Let's switch for a moment to the question of simplicity versus complexity in the user experience. And all of you are in the business of discovery and recommendation, so you know, certainly recognize how difficult it can be for some people to go about their search or their browse, or as some of us in the field of UI have called it, grazing, to try and find content. As I was discussing with Susan earlier today, there's a UI expert that postulated that there is an interesting balance between simplicity and complexity, where if it's too simple, the consumer does not recognize value. If it's too complex, meaning lots of choices, lots of features and functionality, they may view it as too complex to bother to navigate. So obviously, recommendations and personalization features tend to bubble up and make that better. But there is a balance, because the consumer is looking for value, but your solution may just hide all of that value. How do you deal with that? How do you make your recommendations so smart that it feels simple, feels great, feels like it's an accurate recommendation?
So we have some conceptual UI ideas coming out of our team to really simplify, or what I would actually say is to reduce the time you're spending searching for nothing. So one of the concepts is that when you sit down in front of the television, that we try to predict the things that you might want to watch and keep it to 3 choices to begin with. So the first choice is, it's Friday night at 9 o'clock, you always watch this Game of Thrones on this service, or whatever it happens to be. So that gives you your first choice. Your second choice would be, oh, your favorite sports team is actually playing a game tonight, would you rather watch that? And your third choice would be, you reserved to record this movie, and it actually got recorded this week because it was released, you might want to watch this movie. And so that narrows down 3 really good choices to the user right away. But then we like to think about how to extend those options and opportunities as we go forward by utilizing things like, you know, what TrueOptic can provide, like big data. So maybe instead of looking at just what your habits are for how you watch television, it's looking at a lot of other things. Like, for example, I was watching the guys about finding Fido last night. If your Echo data is hooked up to your set-top box and it knows that you buy dog food and it finds this new show called Finding Fido, it might, even though you've never watched a dog show, it might say, hey, you might like to watch this cool show called Finding Fido because we know you buy dog food, so we know you have a dog. Or we noticed on your TripIt thing that you were going to London, and here's 3 movies based in London you might want to watch so that you get an idea what London's all about before you go there. So not just using data based on what you've watched, because that can really narrow your choices where you don't discover a lot of things you would watch otherwise, but look at other data choices that you've opted in to allow us to see to help you find more interesting content.
I think that's really interesting, the idea of using purchase behavior. So that's something that Amazon does really well. We know that you've bought these baby products, so you're going to be interested in these shows. And one thing that Adobe is doing, and it's hard to answer that question without coming across as a product pitch, but I'm going to do it anyway. So one thing that we're doing is letting our customers use purchase data and also use campaign data. So further upstream, what was the consumer searching for in Google? What were they searching for when they were looking for these shows? And what ads did they respond to? And is a person who clicks on this display ad for whatever show more likely to watch that show, and being able to correlate that to generate better personalization and better recommendations. So really focusing on broadening the data pool, to your point. So it's not just the behavioral inferences, what did this guy watch, but what are they really responding to across all of the digital data that we have available, or that our customers have available to them.
And certainly as a shared device, that type of recommendation or the analysis of all this other data can sometimes be a mismatch with the audience because, again, it is a shared device. But question to the audience, how many of you are creeped out when you are surfing the web and you find out or you realize that one search that you have done looking for a refrigerator, for instance, is resulting in refrigerator ads everywhere you go on the internet? Yeah, that's pretty common understanding. And then how many of you are even more frustrated when you buy that refrigerator and for months later you're still getting that refrigerator ad? Yeah.
That's when you clear your cache. Totally agree.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm not going to ask Kimberly to say how do you solve this, but I'll ask the technology companies out there. Is there a solution? Is there a way for a consumer to register the fact that, hey, I'm done looking at refrigerators. Let's move on. I don't mind the fact that you're targeting me, but let's make it useful at least.
Yeah, so absolutely. And at Trip, we don't have as much experience doing that on the e-commerce side, but we're doing that with some of the tune-in and audience acquisition work that we're doing for media companies, where we're then We have our conversion tags across their apps and their sites, so we know when you actually then subscribe. So we're not wasting your ad dollars in terms of continuing to do tune-in or audience acquisition for people that just subscribed. From a technical standpoint, the same thing could be done when you actually check out on a purchase as well. And to me, it's somewhat surprising that it's not more of a standard, because it's not, from a technological standpoint, it's not that difficult.
But it is an investment.
Yeah, I mean, it is something that you actually have to plan out and do. But I think the ROI on that's pretty immediate because of the not wasting impressions on people that have already made the purchase, or even if you want to still targeting them with another product, not the same washing machine or fridge they already bought.
Are you pointing out the fact that the marketplace needs to have better trained professionals in this area to make sure that the companies that are putting out media and selling products are successfully targeting, retargeting, remarketing, whatever you want to call that, as well as completing the transaction?
I wouldn't say so that all the people in the agencies don't hate me. I wouldn't say that it's...
I'm not sure it's an agency responsibility as much as it is
as a
provider.
Marketer. Yeah, I mean, I think, being completely candid, I think it's somewhat the leaders in retargeting. If no one's asking you to do it, why bother? I think as more and more people are realizing that that's an opportunity, and I know in terms of OTT subscription, because there's so much churn and people are really trying to pay attention to their KPIs in terms of user acquisition, that it's something that everybody asks about. And I think as it spreads to more industries, I think it'll just become the standard very quickly.
Kimberly, are you exercising these capabilities at Viacom, or do you see this as an area where you need to make deeper investments?
Yes, we need to make deeper investments. Part of our problem is on our owned and operated, we don't have that depth of content. So we've licensed out a lot of our content, so it goes back to that historical model. So for me to make a recommendation to you on, say, the Comedy Central app, I only have a limited number of shows in that current season. So it doesn't really give me a lot to say, oh, well, here's the next episode, or hey, you like comedy, here's another thing. Well, of course you're in comedy, so it's kind of insulting. But what we need to do is start leveraging more data to do cross-platform, cross-brand recommendations, and looking at other data sources. So if it's a rainy day, or if I suspect maybe you just went through a terrible breakup, let's give you something sad to watch, or if you're planning a trip, then let's give you some travel movie or something like that. So we need to start looking for outside data to lift our products. And as I said earlier, we really don't care where you watch it, but we need that ability to surface that content and still keep that person engaged in our brands and our products.
And do you want to turn to these technology folks and ask them to make special accommodations for you generically as a media company to insert your marketing messages into their personalization and recommendation solutions?
Yeah, I mean,
I'll do it.
Yeah. I'm hesitant to answer because now I'm going to have meetings with all these people afterwards. Yeah, of course. We want, if I know you're searching for something, definitely we want our content to be offered up as that recommendation. But we want it to be smart too, and I think that it's frustrating, like you said. I looked at a pair of shoes, and the shoes are still haunting me. And it's like, okay, I got it. I didn't like you. I don't want to have this relationship with you, and you still have it. So it is that balance to surface up what is needed at that moment, and not what was needed 3 weeks ago.
We're seeing media sellers like Viacom use DMPs more intelligently to pull first-party data, combine it with second-party data, like if they have a relationship with their MVPD, and pull in third-party data as well, stuff that they're licensing through Blue Kai or others, for content targeting as opposed to just ad targeting. So developing segments in the DMP, like Adobe Audience Manager, and using that to actually make recommendations based on the pooled data. So really extending the DMP capabilities beyond just ad targeting and using it for content and recommendations and personalization in really intelligent ways.
By the way, audience, I'd like to get a question here for this group, so if anyone has one building up in their mind, please let me know. And I'd also like to note that Campbell hurt his foot chasing after business with these other folks. We have a question over here. Please state your name, your business, and your question.
Lauren King with a small MVPD, Fidelity Communications. So it was neat, you mentioned Alexa or Amazon Echo. What are you guys doing integrating with that today? Because I know my company, we're looking at a lot of home automation and stuff like that and how we can integrate that into, I know set-top boxes are coming later, but talk about integrating that into set-top boxes. But that's real interesting that, you know, I could say, hey, I broke up with, you know, someone, and then it says, I'll play the Notebook. You know, it's like, so tell me, you know, I don't know, but what are you guys doing with those things? Because that is something we are looking at as an integration.
Thank you. Nice question.
So at AltaCast, we've been thinking about what the ecosystem is in the home in the future, which, you know, is a great question. And whether the set-top box is going to be around forever. And one of the ideas that's kind of been coming out, particularly since DOCSIS 3.1, is a gateway set-top box. That's basically a data set-top box that also is particularly because most MVPDs also offer your your broadband service as well as your television service, that if they had one box in your home that was a gateway that also provided home automation services as well. This isn't a video gateway anymore because they're all going to start moving to IPTV delivery. All of this stuff we talk about, you know, of OTT, it's all going to converge as IPTV is going to be the way we're going to receive our video in the future for the most part. QAM's eventually going to go away. It also allows us to aggregate different things. So I don't think anybody's made any deals with Echo yet to grab their data, but I think that kind of thing is on the way because what will eventually happen, we hope, is that all of these IoT sensors and services, that information is going to all flow through the gateway up to the cloud, and there's going to be a lot of big data analysis of all that data that's in your household with what I like to call a household firewall because it needs to be very secure. And those things can start to inform each other to help as far as your media, watching your media and determining what media you watch. Those might be connected to every kind of device that you would watch in a household, whether it's a tablet, a cell phone, a TV, a HDMI stick, a HDMI puck. So there still might be small set-top boxes in that ecosystem, but all that video will pass through that box. That box won't do anything to the video, but it'll be seeing what's going on all those channels and who's watching, and even helping things like in your household where your kids upstairs using the internet and your bandwidth is killed and you're getting buffering on your big TV, you can actually start to do inside the house throttling to decide who gets how much bandwidth within the house. All kinds of things I think are on their way to help.
Speaking about technology, as you just have here, I'm curious about the mobile impact and whether or not that is radically changing discovery, personalization, and the TV user experience. The younger generation, Gen X, Z, and Y, are they doing so many different things that it's breaking what you intend to do? Or do you have good metrics coming from a mobile platform as well? Or is your metric only coming from the television consumption?
So at Adobe, we have really good data on TV Everywhere consumption because we're providing TV Everywhere authentication for 99% of the ecosystem. And we do see specific differences in mobile consumption versus OTT devices, gaming consoles, et cetera. As you would expect, mobile is used more for snacking and watching short form. And whenever there's a very specific live sporting event, in TV Everywhere, you'll see rates spike. So we're expecting this summer with the Olympics to see spikes on mobile devices when specific games are on. And then long form is typically consumed via tablets as well as OTT devices like Roku and Apple TV. So that's certainly a trend in TV Everywhere.
We'll get this question in just a moment. Let me ask all of you very quickly, where do you see this all going in light of all these devices and mobile coming on so strong with this generational change? What is your big prediction in a short little answer as we get ready for this question here?
I'd say overall, I mean, people say, is TV dead? I think it's the concept of what TV is what's changing, and it's really the content is what people want. So it's not necessarily the traditional watch it, a family in the living room watching it. It's that content is everywhere, and we've got to be cognizant of that. We need to extend that experience across all these devices. From a programmer perspective, we have a disconnect between what the MVPDs have as far as data and what we have. And that's where something as an industry, we need to partner better to make this a holistic experience and keep that value of that subscription model. Otherwise, that viewing is going to shift to other platforms that do give people that full experience.
Susan?
So Gartner coined a term, I think they did, a few weeks ago called ambient UI. And I think this is kind of the direction I'd like to see things going. In particular, I think I mentioned yesterday, I kind of prodded the Netflix guy about Nest, but it's basically really understanding how we watch things and what we do, and using natural language, voice for user interface, which will make things so much faster for search and discovery instead of having to type things in. And also recognizing the person's voice that picked up the remote control. So you have different people in the household, you know, who actually has the remote control. You can identify what they usually watch at that time. That you know a lot about them from the data you're picking up from this bigger data basket that we're going to collect from. So you start to build this kind of Nest ability to know what you watch, when you want to watch it, and not have to do very much searching at all, and really get a much more pleasurable experience without having to spend a half hour looking for something to watch.
Yeah, I think from the consumer perspective, things will continue to get better. I mean, watching TV right now is awesome. If you think about, where we were 10 years ago, like the idea that there's so much great content out there that you need recommendations, you can't figure out what to watch, is such a first world problem.
Yeah, I agree. It's a good thing.
I mean, if you think about it, it is a great problem to have, and TV is awesome. I mean, there's so much good content out there right now, and I think that if we figure out this discovery and personalization stuff, it's going to get even better.
Just a quick statistic. I read there's a really good paper that Cisco just put out on how much consumption over bandwidth is over the next 10 years, and they said in 1 month in 2019, the amount of video that will get created and uploaded to the internet cannot be watched in 5 million life years. 1 month of video getting uploaded to the internet. So,
and of course, what you need to know is what's relevant to you and all of that, and which is
right.
good, which is bad.
Such a short life, so much to watch.
Let's ask this question here.
Hi, Beth Harrison with HSN. I'm just curious about the relationship with TV Everywhere and authentication. Does Viacom know when someone's going into their TV Everywhere app who that person is, so then they can thus follow up with recommendations within the TV Everywhere universe?
So with our arrangements we have with our distributors, I don't know who you are. I don't have any PII on you. I do have a unique ID, so I can know some information about what you're doing across our products, but that's where the disconnect I was mentioning earlier. Is like, I don't know what you're doing in your set-top box. I don't know what you're doing with other programmers or with that MVPD's app. So my view on who you are is very limited. So that's where we want to leverage other things to get to know more about you.
Yeah.
And you're starting to see data sharing coming up in carriage deals, carriage negotiations, where the MVPD says, I'll give you some information about these subscribers, but I'm going to give you 1.2 billion, not 1.5 billion for this deal. So there is some exchange of value there built around data sharing.
Yeah, I mean, so kind of what I was mentioning before is the content owners themselves, in the big scheme of things, have access to very little data around the consumption of their content. So they're not getting the data from the cable companies. They're not getting the data from where they license that content out to SVOD. They're not getting the data around where they distributed their content internationally. And there's a lot of fragmentation even between their desktop, mobile, and connected TV for their owned and operated. So that's not necessarily, that makes their job very difficult, even in, forget even getting to the point of recommendations and personalization, even in terms of prioritizing what the value of their content is for licensing, like we talked about yesterday, or prioritizing what they should be producing, because content performs differently on linear television than it does over the top. So I think right now, all of the media companies that we're working with, exactly like you said, are looking for other ways to be able to learn more about their audience and how their content is performing. So.
Andre, you said something yesterday in your 5-minute presentation. Oh, let me correct that, 5-minute and 1-second presentation. And that was something about the NBC Heroes show and the fact that it was canceled after 1 season, yet it had tremendous play online. Can you just tell this broader audience here a little bit about that?
Yeah, yeah, and not picking on NBC at all, because I can give you an
That's okay.
example for ABC or CBS or Fox or Turner or anybody that has good content. Viacom. So the example was for Heroes Reborn. The show was canceled after one season. It was their 11th in terms of Nielsen linear television ratings out of the 20 scripted shows that NBC had. It was, I think, number 11. It was number 63 out of the top 200 scripted shows on television for linear. But in terms of OTT, it was number 11 overall in the United States, and it was in the top 15 in all 10 of the largest internet-connected markets in the world. So, the United States, UK, Brazil, Germany, et cetera. So the example that we showed yesterday was talking about understanding the value of that content for licensing, right? If you look at linear television ratings, it was not a valuable show to license out to SVOD. If you look at actual online streaming, it was one of the most valuable pieces of content in the world in pretty much any market that's of any significance. So I think it's, again, like having access to more data around how your content's performing across different channels and platforms is just going to open up so much opportunity for content owners to monetize that content more in a myriad of ways. So.
I love hearing about these issues that involve analysis through tremendous amounts of data that you can then derive a conclusion from. But what about those individuals that fall outside that data net? And I'll refer to my 21-year-old son, who watches a lot of internet content. And his pattern of consumption is very different than everyone in this room here. But he's more indicative of a younger generation than we are. How do these solutions that you're working on today or planning for the future intend to catch those individuals that are outside that consumption sphere that we all know and love so well?
The great part about that generation is they don't care about what you know about them. It's they've done surveys. They're happy for you to know everything that they do and where they go, and they've been posting crap all over Facebook for years that probably shouldn't be there. So it just goes back to the same data stuff that TrueOptic is talking about. You get their data, you have a good idea what they do, what they like to do, and you can start to focus and help them find what they like to watch too. They're probably the biggest black hole internet surfers of anybody, right? They'll start in the morning looking at something, and they'll keep chasing down that rabbit hole, looking at something they never expected to look at. And in some ways, maybe they won't want us to recommend because they like to just go wildly into the great beyond to find new horizons.
But you did mention Facebook in there, and what if that consumption is predominantly inside of Facebook, and they're happy to read about cats and whatnot and look at videos that their friends are posting, and that becomes their new consumption pattern? Is there any thought here as to how we entice them through discovery, personalization, recommendation to come over to the more traditional?
Well, Facebook data is also, there's an API for Facebook data as well, right? So that's part of what I was talking about earlier. If you are capturing that data, some people say that friend recommendations for content are has much more uptake than what we drive by what you watch. So what a friend is watching, you are much more likely to test out and try and watch than what pops up in your recommendation engine. So this is just one other data point as far as I'm concerned.
Are you all comfortable with Facebook having that data and assuming that your business is built upon getting access to that data and building a business around it? I'm talking to the audience, I'm sorry. You couldn't see me looking at all of you. By show of hands, everyone comfortable with Facebook having that data and you accessing it? Okay, interesting. Questions from the audience. We're getting down near the end of this session. I'd like to get some input and some dialogue for this community. Anyone have a question at this moment? Panelists, let me turn the question back to you. Do you believe you can build a good business on the backs of a Facebook community? Let's just say, for instance, Facebook takes everybody out there, and this next generation grows up, and they're more than happy to subscribe to a Facebook service, and they don't need Viacom and others.
I'd say as a programmer and as programmers across the industry and cable providers, we have to kind of get over the brand. Like we think the brand is very important, but that generation doesn't care. They want to find the content. They want shorter form content. So we've built our business off, at least, the 30-hour episode. So we really have to change our content, change our strategy, and drive to their needs, not so much, only this brand and this brand, is that experience, and really broaden what we target, who we target.
That reminds me, you speak about brand and changing the content. Everyone probably read the headlines about Saturday Night Live, Lorne Michaels making the decision to reduce the ad load for Saturday Night Live. Very interesting. Is that the future of broadcast and cable television, that we're going to change the format of video to make it more appealing to the next generation? And will your tools help make that happen?
So we've been talking with a lot of media companies that have been going through that, or planning for it. But I think people are looking to then supplement that revenue, at least the ones that we've talked to, with brand placement on a lot of that content. And I think that's one of the huge opportunities. I mean, if you look at the over-the-top ecosystem right now, licensing of content is more revenue, far more revenue than advertising across the OTT ecosystem. And then if you just look at it in terms of percentage growth, brand placement is the fastest growing. It's still, dwarfs in terms of the other ones, but it's a fast growing opportunity. But I think in the next year or so, we're going to be to the place where you can have a Coca-Cola bottle show up in a scene and then be able to show, attribution to Coca-Cola that, hey, people that saw that Coca-Cola bottle were more likely to go buy a six-pack of Coke, or the same refrigerator that you saw if it's at Sears. Hey, people that saw the main character in this show open a fridge and say, hey, I'm so happy Sears delivered my Kenmore fridge, that they actually went and bought that. So I think when we get there, which we're very close to being there, I think all of a sudden you can supplement a lot of all that missed ad revenue with brand placement and then content licensing. So the monetization, I think, is going to increase, not decrease.
Well, the monetization models will change, certainly. I've worked with some studios and creators in Hollywood who are experimenting with all sorts of ideas. Converting those ideas into the practical realities of distribution are often challenged because the model is just not there to support that yet. Questions for the audience, because we're coming to the close here, and I just want to make sure you have an opportunity to raise your question as well. Anyone? Show of hands. Since we've got an ad tech community here as well, I'm curious, for all the ed tech folks out there and the panelists here, do you agree with these statements here that this is a natural evolution and we will get to a change in content to match what is likely to be the right consumer demand? Patrick, you've studied this for quite some time. Do you have any thoughts in this area of a question for this group?
Patrick Donahue, independent consultant. I just had a question about sort of the different data sources you get for either recommendations or personalization. And the reason I ask is I had a really interesting experience the other day where I searched on Google for Ferris Bueller's Day Off for some random reason. And then I went to Netflix and it popped up in my recommendations and I was like fascinated. I mean, it's obvious how that could be done technically, right? But I was like, I wasn't aware anyone was doing that. Is that a thing? Is that's happening? Because in doing a lot of recommendation jobs over the years, that was always one of the challenges, is you only had data from certain touch points.
It's just starting to happen.
It was really
it's
interesting.
just starting to happen, and it is interesting.
I validated it because I went and searched for some other random movies, and sure enough, they were there. It was really
there's some
fascinating.
other weird crossover things that my kids told me about, which I wasn't aware of, that Android voice is pretty much listening to you all the time on your cell phone, and they've had stuff pop up in ads on their phone based on
Oh, that's
they've
super
talked
creepy.
about. Yeah, it's very creepy. You can turn it off, but they don't, they obviously turn it on automatically, and then you have to turn it off. So yeah, it's a little interesting. But on this ad stuff, I think, and I've always kind of sat on this funny fence about that. Like for me, I'd rather not get ads for baby diapers. I'd rather get ads for things that I'm interested in shopping for. So knowing a little bit about me, I'm kind of okay with, because if I'm going to get ads, I'd rather get ads that are things that I'm interested in getting ads for.
And we talked a lot about the technology and the data to lead to proper recommendations, personalization, et cetera. Is there a more human element to this as well? Is there some controlling of the dials and the levers by humans to make this more accurate?
I think it can be helpful. The problem with I want to say the problem with humans, because that sounds terrible.
I took it as a problem the way you said that.
So I think you can't scale human curated recommendations or segmentation. It's just not scalable, or it won't be personalized enough at the individual level. But I do think, and we've had in terms of what the rules are for some of our algorithms, or what the segment patterns look like, we've had, you know, ethnomusicologists and data scientists and anthropologists kind of study, you know, more broadly humans and kind of give our engineers the kind of framework. But our theory is, or our belief is, that you actually have to do it on the data side to really make it personalized and real time and actionable.
I have to ask a question to you and the audience by show of hands. How many of you would be okay if these technology companies, service providers, Google, et cetera, gave you the option to review what they think your profile is and adjust it? Pretty much everybody. Panelists, opportunity?
Do some of that. Google does do some of that. You can look at your profile. Look at what's been recommended.
For some reason, Campbell's mic is going in and out.
No,
Do you
no,
want to repeat that?
So yeah, so Google does do some of that. So you can look at your Google history
Spooky.
and look at it is spooky. You are a white male, 24 years old, and you're interested. But Google does do some of that.
And do they give you the ability to go in and make adjustments to it?
They do. I mean, the shotgun approach is to just clear all your cookies, but then you lose valuable ads.
Right.
Actually, stuff gets really untargeted. You start to see baby diaper ads.
Right.
But they do give you some control over the dials.
And from a media company's perspective, would you like to see that happen so that you can get more targeted towards your audience?
Definitely. I mean, we want to have, you know, highly personalized recommendations for people. So we definitely do want to see as much data as we can about the person and know that it's accurate. I think the key to what we've been talking is that kind of surprise and delight, and not having to have a high level of interaction. Like, at one point on MTV, like, you had to set it up, the site, and like choose your favorite, you know, artists and choose this and choose this. People don't want to do that. They, you know, especially a younger generation, they want to stumble across things. They want to be the first one to discover it. They want to be the one that tells their friends about it, without having to be overly engaged. And that's what we need to drive.
True, but there are interesting headlines out there, like the one that said, "My TiVo thinks I'm gay." And you know, there's examples like that, where the baby diaper issue, where if you want to tune your profile, it seems appropriate. And I'm curious from the audience whether or not you realized, like, I'll plead naivete. I did not realize that Google gave you the ability to go in and adjust your profile. Did any others out there share that with me? You did not realize that Google had that ability?
Well, how many people knew that you actually go see your profile and see
Oh,
what they
yeah.
think that you are, who you are?
Yeah, a few people did.
But for us, at the end of the day, if it, you know, thinks you are, you know, live in Montana and you're 17, if that's your viewing habit, even though you may be
doesn't
50
matter.
and live in LA, then I'm going to target that to you. So, I mean, for us, as long as we are giving you an accurate recommendation of something you're actually going to watch, you know, call it what you want, but it will drive that recommendation for us.
Can I wrap around back to UI just a little bit?
Sure.
I'm kind of curious from the audience. There's one thing I've been thinking about for a long time, which is what I like to coin the term app fatigue. Every time you open a cell phone, look at an application on the web, on your phone, it's like, download our app, you know, and I mean, I don't think everybody wants an app for everything, and the media producers have an app for every TV show, and I think it's a problem that needs to be solved. I'm just curious what other people think about that, because I think too many apps is just clutter now, and somebody quoted the other day on one of the panels saying that kids download, 100 apps in some period of time, but then they delete 40, and it just seems like a very ineffective way for us to be finding and looking at the things we want.
Well, panelists, I want to thank you for a great session, and audience, thank you very much for your participation. I hope you got some good value out of this. Thank you all.